automate when I can charge my bike with simple plug-in controllers. I can remotely control when I'm switching it on and off. I can use my electric hot water system as a battery, which I do. So any excess solar from my solar system during the day, when we're not there, I dump it into my hot water tank and use that as a battery. I've also got a small battery. I couldn't afford a large battery. I didn't have anywhere to put it in my rental, so I've got a small battery, and I use that. So when I do come home at night and need to charge my electric vehicle, I can dump the energy that was left over after I've preheated my electric hot water tank, and after I'd filled my battery, I can then dump that into my bike in the evening. And these are all budget, small expenditure items that allows me to do it. I'm not satisfying 100% of my demand, I'm not satisfying 100% of my vehicle, I'm not satisfying 100% of my hot water demand, but I can knock off about 30 or 40 or 50% of it depending on what's going on. And what I'm finding, and the benefit is that over time, I'm realising that this natural variation I have as a human allows that to work. There'll be times when it's bigger, there'll be times when it's smaller. I can charge when I'm out, I can charge when I'm at home. And it's that natural diversity that we all have as humans that means the grid isn't going to collapse. It means that we're going to spread it around, and this diversity is what you get. When you look at the big countries with big uptake of renewables or big uptake of electric vehicles, it's that diversity that you and I and everyone in this room represent that means it's going to be just fine.
A couple of figures that just to throw at you, the Australian Energy Market Operator, which is thinking about these things now, they've estimated that if 1/2 of the fleet is electric, so I think there's about 2 million private vehicles out there now, so 1 million vehicles are electric, that's going to add between about 20 and 30% to overall demand in the grid. But think about the grid, if everyone switches that on at the peak times, then that's an issue. But if people switch them on and use and download that electricity at off-peak times, there's a lot of that grid is basically there. It's only used at peak times for very small amounts of time a year, about 1% or 2% of the time. So there's a lot of capacity to have that charging, and I don't see any problem with that as long as it is controlled. An interesting going the other way is that if you do have 50% of the fleet electric, that actually gives you a storage resource of 350 gigawatt hours, I think it is.
Yeah, gigawatt hours.
350 gigawatt hours, which is actually the same size as Snowy 2.0. So just think about that. Now, Snowy 2.0 sounds like a nice idea. I'm not too sure what you're going to do with a big centralised thing like that, 2,000 megawatts for 175 hours. I don't know when you'd actually use that, but just think about electric vehicles. Now, you can use that whenever you want, for short periods of time, which is probably what's going to be the need. Just a fascinating shift into the next evolution of the electricity grid. And as you mentioned before, so Nissan are actually bringing out the first of these vehicle-to-grid ones later on this year. The Japanese are really interested because since the Fukushima collapse, they've actually had shortages of power. They've basically closed down their entire nuclear industry. I think they've got 1 or 2 reactors back up now. They have learned to become really, really efficient. And they now see electric vehicles as a valuable resource. Hence this push to using electric vehicles to basically balance the grid, to put stuff back into the grid. So you start to see that happening more often. Other car companies haven't done that so much because they're worried about the warranty on their batteries. I think this has decided, well, we're pretty happy with the chemistry and the fact that it can actually last a lot longer than what's thought.
And Giles, I think the beautiful thing about this is that in the same way that we're seeing benefits of distributed solar, so if you generate solar on the roof of a building like this or on your home, you're generating it right where you need it, right? So you're not having to transmit the power, you're not having to distribute the power, you can build redundancy in, you can build diversity into that network, and that's the benefit that you get from distributed batteries as well, or electric vehicles used as batteries. Not only as potential energy that you can send back out to the grid when it's required, but also as potential load. And in Australia, we already have many places where there's the duck curve, where there's so much solar being generated that energy actually is flowing negative. This place is one of them, right? So in the middle of the day here, there's so much solar that the demand actually goes negative. There's more energy being generated from solar than there is demand on the network. So guess what you can do? The network wants to balance that. They want to keep their network running nice and stable. They don't want to see big surges in demand and big surges of generation. They want to level that out.